Welcome back to the Storyrant podcast. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, cosmic horror madman, and I'm joined by Brianna da Silva, who is a filmmaker and indie author, and we're going to be discussing not only her work and her upcoming short film, but also the film The Substance.
Is everything okay? So smile!
Might have heard of it. And in general, liminal spaces in modern horror films. It's going to be a fun discussion. Brianna, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll go ahead and get started with the discussion.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm Brianna. So as Eric mentioned, I'm a author and a filmmaker. I write epic fantasy, also horror, and yeah, I am on my journey trying to break into Hollywood. That's a big part of my focus right now in life.
That is really fucking cool. Like, I've had no, seriously, I've had like I mentioned another filmmaker buddy of mine, Eric Hackler. We've had on like the books the plan to kickstart a short film for my like OEI thing, and I just haven't had time to fucking do it yet. But it's really cool that you're doing it, and I can't wait to see your short film, because the way you've been talking about it on Facebook and whatnot has been, you know, you're talking about the importance of your DP and lighting and contrast and whatnot and cinematography, and it's refreshing to see that.
Yeah, I'll give some context too around like why I'm making this film. So basically, the strategy here, I have a mentor. His name is Cameron Pasha. He's a producer and a screenwriter out in Hollywood, and he's been meeting with me for like about, I don't know, a year and a half ish, giving me advice. And basically, what he recommended that I should do, and I've heard this kind of advice from a lot of people, is as a writer director, right? Because that's what I am. That's what I'm trying to make a career as. Is that what I want to have is like two really good polished feature screenplays, and then also a really good polished short film, and that's to show the range of my skills, right? Ideally, one of those scripts is something that I want to make soon. The other one is something that's like, oh, this is kind of down the road. This is like the kind of an example of the career I want to get to eventually. And then, the short film, of course, needs to show my directing abilities. So showing my writing abilities and my directing abilities. So I've been working on that. I have a feature script. It's called The Sacrament. And it is a queer horror film that deals with purity culture and homophobia, basically. And that's polished. I've been sending it to screenplay contests. It's already gotten some accolades. And so then this short film I'm working on, Guardian, is a similar tone and genre and style to show, not only that I can write, but also that I can direct. And I've been doing like a bunch of, smaller, cheaper things to practice my skills, of course, to prepare to make this particular short film. And for this one, it's going to be a much bigger budget. Try to make it as close to Hollywood, cinematic quality as possible. So that's going to be like my, my portfolio piece, my calling card. That's the goal.
Oh, that's really cool. So we're going to talk more about like your artistic and authorial pursuits in a little bit, but for now we're going to focus a little bit on the substance and liminality in modern horror films. One of my favorite subjects. I'm getting goosebumps right now. So The Substance was directed and written by Coralie Farja, I believe is how you pronounce it in English. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Don't ask me.
But the film follows Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, a fading Hollywood celebrity who decides to try a new experimental drug that creates a younger, better doppelganger of herself with some, shall we say, unexpected side effects. It's a body horror film that should probably make David Cronenberg very proud. I don't know him personally, though. So let's talk about modern horror. And so, full disclosure, I watched The Substance for the first time last night, and I was blown away. Like, this Like, of all the horror movies that have come out that have used like liminal spaces and dreamlike imagery to enhance their messages or what have you, or to enhance the overall, I guess, piece of art, I don't want to say product, I think it's the most successful. Would you agree with that?
The most successful? I don't know. It's definitely stood out to me as one of my favorite ones that has come out recently. It does a lot of things that I love as a filmmaker, interested in horror particularly. So yeah, I was a big fan of that film.
Yeah, and by successful, I don't mean like monetarily, but successful at conveying. Because like for me, like especially in weird fiction is really, and especially with Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, it's really hard to capture that on screen. And I've been sort of developing in my head the best ways to convey it. And it's not necessarily something that you do through words, but rather visual language, I think. Okay. Whereas, you know, in literature, cosmic horror is much more wordy. It's much more about, you know, painting weird vistas and whatnot, and exploring. It's very much a genre that a lot of people assume can only be done in literature versus on film. And I'm seeing through like the filmography of David Lynch and a lot of people who are following in his footsteps, like what's her name that did I Saw the TV Glow is also following in that direction as well, where modern horror is getting a lot more dreamlike, a lot more artistic than genre horror typically has been in the past. Usually that's, even your supernatural horror is not something that delves into liminal spaces. Hell, have you seen Lovely, Dark and Deep?
No.
Oh, I recommend that one. That is a fantastic cosmic horror film, and it has to do with our national parks and people just disappearing. It ends in such. Oh, I'm not going to spoil it, but watch it. I've been meaning to do a video essay on it. I've just been too busy. But I think if the substance did not have that dreamlike quality to it, I don't know if it would have had the same impact, because like the cinematography is just so crisp and bright. The areas that are dirty feels very suitably dirty and grimy, but those areas like where Demi Moore's character is picking up her packages in that, you know, the weird cubby of a room that just looks like she stepped into an alternate dimension, it adds something that I think, you know, the film wouldn't have had without that aspect. You know, it makes it feel like a living nightmare.
I understand your question now, and yes, I agree. Part of what is happening there too is like the way that they're just the choices in shots. There's a lot of really uncomfortable close-ups that are in that film, and they're fantastic to experience on the big screen or just on any sort of big screen. You know, like you have like close-ups on, like, for example, the guy at the beginning when he's eating those shrimps. It's like the most uncomfortable part of there's like all this body horror, but like this guy eating shrimps is like the most uncomfortable part of the film, and it's because we're so close to his mouth, and it's like and just filling up the space, and it's like you're not meant to be at that place physically. You're not supposed to be like physically close to someone while they're, you know, to their mouth as they're eating.
Right.
There's a lot of things that they do in there in that film where they just move the camera in places that you're not comfortable being and you don't want to be there. And so that adds to that discomfort. And then also what you're talking about with the liminal spaces, where it's just like they do a lot of like the long hallways that are like just too perfect. There's a lot of things that are too perfect in that film, or things that are just, they feel just a little bit off. Like even, you know, the whole thing with, I'm not going to spoil. Well, I guess we are going to talk spoilers for this film.
Yeah, this is entirely a spoiler discussion.
But for the like company or whatever that's selling the substance, it's never explained. Like we don't understand who they are, where they came from, and all that it just stays in this level of like, it's not just mystery. It's like, it's liminal. It's like, it's one step off of reality, you know, and so it's and that film, it's the whole thing is like, it's a little bit like it's a dream. It's real, but it's like hyper real, and it's mystical, and Yeah, it has that just, yeah, liminal is a great way to describe it.
Right. And so the guy you're talking about is Dennis Quaid, and he played a character named Harvey, no last name. Wonder who that's supposed to be a reference to.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah. Neither did I. I'm just putting that together now, looking at the IMDb page right now. Because like all of the male actors, and I guess we need to talk about the themes a little bit. Like its themes are very, very clear. I mean, at one point, Demi Moore's character is like, "No, I can't let you go," to her doppelganger because she hates herself. She flat out says that. But on top of the film being beautifully shot, it's also extremely relatable. Like, even as a guy, I just picked up on this immediately. The fact that many of the professions that are similarly tied to Hollywood treat women the same way. There's like, they're disposable once they reach a certain age, and their looks start to fade. They're out the door. Other professions do this too, maybe not at the same extent as Hollywood, but Hollywood also has a bad habit of passing these unhealthy beauty expectations onto their female viewers too, that internalize it. It also teaches men other terrible habits too, but that's probably outside the scope of this podcast today. That's a subject for another time, probably. But I don't even really think that these executives are caricature that much. Like, they are caricatures,
Right, but like not that much. There are people that are that ridiculous in real life,
Right.
Or at least come close.
So I was and that point about caricature, I had not a disagreement with my editor on a character, a background character in So in my next novel, Cthulhu Grimoire, one of the main characters is a black detective who works out of Los Angeles. And his wife's father used to be a police officer within the LAPD, and he is a super huge racist. And there's a line where Hunter is reliving his youth and dating his wife and everything, and he's like, so he asks this guy point blank in like the study or what have you, and there's an unequal power dynamic, so do you think if I go to the police academy and become one of the good ones, will I be good enough for your daughter? And the guy just says, hell no. There are people that are that cartoonishly evil as we are seeing now, in the real world. And I don't think it's necessarily a problem to portray them as such, I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that, on caricature in film or what have you, when it's appropriate, when it's not?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, actually. That's like a pretty deep topic, and I have thought about that a lot. I feel like it just depends on what the goals of the story are, and what right. kind of subgenre it is that you're telling, and what it is that you want to say about human nature. Because there's a place for, your gray villains, your complicated characters. I think for me, I feel like the value in those kinds of villains, the ones that are more relatable, are that it's the intention is for you as an audience to actually empathize with them, so that you see yourself in them, so that you can see them in you. Like, that way it can be a self-reflective thing, so that you cannot be a villain in real life, right? Like, so there's the benefit is it's like a cautionary tale. And as opposed to, sometimes you need to have just like a clear good guys versus bad guys kind of a story, because you're dealing
right.
with things that are pretty black and white issues morally, or just the subgenre doesn't really have that kind of room for nuance. It's just like, it just kind of gets in the way of the story you're trying to tell. So in those cases,
right.
You do want to just have a solid, okay, this is just the villain, and you want to enjoy like rooting against them. Like, that there can be a lot of fun in like hating a villain, and
right.
that adds to the like entertainment value and the catharsis when you finally see them defeated.
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends. It depends on what kind of emotional experience you want to create, and also what it is that you're talking about, like morally in your story.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And I think the more that I continue to write, the more that I pump out short stories for the Books of Cthulhu, the less, I guess, the less fair I feel that I have to be to, the other political side or what have you. The fairness doctrine only works in, presenting facts, right? Not necessarily ideologies, I don't think. And I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world to, as I just said, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, to, show people who are actually awful, who do exist in society, as being awful, because we want people to empathize with the heroes of these stories, not so much with the villains. And I think there is something to be said about, morally gray villains, as interesting as they can be, creating sort of a moral dilemma in society to a certain extent, because some people have really fucked up compasses when it comes to morality, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the substance combines spiritual metaphor, sort of the old versus the new person, sexual desire, and the objectification of women, if I can talk properly, and body horror to really sell its point to the audience, allowing it to really transcend the trappings of genre horror. And really, this elevates the film. The fact that, like, it is sort of this. Again, this is spoilery, so if you haven't seen the film, we're about to spoil the ending. How Elizabeth Sparkle, her ultimate fate is to become this Cronenberg monster of self-hate that melts into her own Hollywood star is brilliant.
Although I have to interject real quick, because I didn't catch this when I watched it. I only caught this when I was like watching interviews with the creators.
Okay.
But at that point, she actually has accepted herself. Like, because you notice, like, when she's at the very end, as she's like fading in, she like smiles. She has like this big smile at the end. And so there's like this weird element too, where it's like when she stops, when she's no longer like being, she's so far beyond the perfect woman. She's this horrible looking monster. And
right.
And then she's like, she just has like this peace, it's weird.
Right.
That is I didn't notice that either. Like, I noticed the smile, but that didn't click necessarily. But she has an opportunity to connect with someone else during the film, like an old high school acquaintance, I guess. And she uses her connection and her own self-hatred as sort of like it's a prison of her own making, really. Because, like, at a certain point in the film, she's trying to decide to go out with this person, have drinks, have a normal human connection for once, and she just won't let herself do it because, like, she keeps looking in the mirror and then looking to where her doppelganger is behind the wall. I was really, really impressed with this. I can't wait to see what this director does next.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like I said, I've watched, anytime anything has like an impact on me, I go and I watch the interviews with the creators of the film, and she was talking about how she wasn't specifically wanting to speak about Hollywood. She was speaking about just this issue in general, how it affects women in society, and she was like, "What would be the best, format for me to talk about this?" And she chose Hollywood just because she felt kind of like what you were saying earlier, that like that's where this particular problem is the worst and where it's the most prominent.
Yeah. And
yeah, it was funny because, or I think she was saying which career, and she's like, oh, it has to be an actress. And so she was having this interview with the actors sitting next to her, and they're like, oh, it's a horrible thing to think about. I have the profession where this is the worst. But yeah, it's interesting.
Right. So I'll be interested to see how this trend continues to develop. A couple of movies that recently did things like this would be, as I mentioned earlier, I saw the TV Glow, which I did not like initially. I had to, and I'm still like iffy on some parts of it, but it's definitely worth watching and developing your own opinion about. Like, I had a whole video essay on liminal spaces and how to include them effectively, and I wasn't 100% leaning towards I saw the TV Glow doing this well, and now I'm starting to reconsider that a little bit. But there's also Skinamarink. Kyle Edward Ball is the director and writer of that. He also did a short film called Heck that is, I think, the stronger of the two pieces. Like, the short film's a little bit better than Skinamarink, but Skinamarink is essentially a experiment to put to film a childlike nightmare. So he ran this experiment on YouTube where he would have his commenters send in their nightmares. And the most common one was children waking up in the middle of the night, finding that their parents are gone and there's a monster in the house. So he put that on film. And let's see, there's a few others too. Lovely Dark and Deep does a really good job of this as well. So there is quite a few different films that are using liminal spaces to great effect right now. And I think a lot of this has to do with how, and it might be actually related, not necessarily caused by the analog horror movement on YouTube. Have you ever checked any of that stuff out, like Local 58 or anything?
No, like I'm familiar vaguely with what you're talking about, but I haven't dived deep into that. No.
Yeah. So I've made some analog horror myself. I've dabbled. That's how the OEI, I guess, multiverse got started. But so some of the more popular ones, the ones that I recommend are Local 58, Gemini Home Entertainment. It's probably my favorite one. It's very Lovecraftian. The first video is about the animals in Missouri, I think. And basically it goes through a bunch of different animals that you would expect to find, like a mid-90s VHS nature documentary. And then suddenly it's talking about wood crawlers, these invisible things that infest your homes, what have you. And it's really interesting. I don't think the creators put anything else out on the YouTube channel, but analog horror is pretty big, but like I think its popularity is starting to fall off a little bit now, internet wise. But it's you can see its influence on Skinamarink. You can see its influence on I Saw the TV Glow. Late Night with the Devil actually has like strong analog horror vibes throughout most of its runtime. It's basically just an extension of the found footage genre, but taking it in to the realm of dreamlike nightmares and things like that. And I think that's really fucking interesting. Like, I want to see more filmmakers do stuff like this. So I think now that we've talked a little bit about the substance and liminal spaces in general, let's go ahead and move on to some questions I'd like to ask you.
Yeah.
So, question one. How have modern horror films contributed to the types of stories you're trying to tell?
Yeah, it's interesting because I went for a while not thinking I liked horror. I think a lot of people that become like fans of horror go through a similar thing where you have like this image in your head of what horror is, and it's just like, for me, I just thought of like slasher films and like torture porn. Like I had this like judgment of it. I didn't know that it actually includes so many different things, that it's like this really broad, genre that included a lot of things I was already enjoying. And that happened, the shift happened when I watched Get Out, because that was like one of those films that people that don't normally watch horror tended to watch, and it like blew my mind. I was like, oh, I didn't know that you could do that in a horror. Like you could like speak on social issues, and yeah, like you could tell a really intelligent story, which feels funny to me now. It's like, well, yeah, obviously, of course you can, but I just didn't know. And then I think the next film I saw that really like changed my perspective on horror was what's it called? Midsommar. And so that also was like, oh, this is such an artistic, just gorgeously done, character driven. Like it has all the stuff I normally love about filmmaking. That it can be deep. It can be, really incredible acting, really incredible cinematography, all those things. And so then I just started, consuming lots of horror. And yeah, I found that for me, it's like, I think, yeah, the films that have inspired me have been ones that do, social commentary. They're very artistic. It's a work of art, right? Like that sounds so judgmental. Yeah. It's like, of course it can be, but yeah. And so I found that like that was what I wanted to do, is that I wanted to do like social commentary that's like, and I love the kind of playing with other genres, like, throwing in a bit of myth or kind of dreamlike stuff, I really enjoyed. Although it's a controversial film, I did really like Jordan Peele's his second film, Us, as well. It was just so unsettling and uncomfortable, and you keep thinking about, you're like, what the hell does this mean? And it makes you want to like draw in deeper and pick apart all the symbolism and everything.
Jordan Peele is just so fucking talented. Like, who would have ever thought that he would be one of the preeminent horror directors of our age after Key and Peele?
No, but here's the thing, because
it's so cool.
There's actually such a similarity between comedy and horror, even though they seem like they're completely opposite genres, because they're all about timing. It's all about creating an expectation. There's also a similarity between like erotic stories too, because there's a similar thing of like build up and expectation and then giving the right payoff, and so there's a lot of like unexpected crossovers, I find, between seemingly opposite genres, specifically the ones that are really primal. And so horror, of course, is really primal.
Right. No, I agree with that. Recently, speaking of erotica, I put out a Dragon Ball video talking about the latest Dragon Ball series, and I was complaining about how the buildup of the main transformation, the big thing that Goku gets in the story, was unsatisfying because it wasn't built up to. It just happens. Ass pull. And I compared, it's like, good storytelling is a lot like sex. You need the foreplay. You can't have too much. You have to have just the right amount, because, if you blow up all over the launch pad, no one's going to be satisfying. No one's going to be satisfied. And it's me. I'm not satisfied.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, and there's probably a good reason why a lot of directors, their first time directorial projects are horror. I mean, there is the part that it's, cheaper to make a horror film, typically a cheap horror film.
The potential for how much money you can make compared to how much it costs is the best out of all the genres. So
right, yeah. I fucking love horror. I was in a similar position to you, when I first, you and I were sitting in that Ashburn writers group for a while, like, man, because I didn't think I was that big of a horror fan, but it turns out I really was. Without knowing it, I grew up on weird fiction with the Twilight Zone and with Alien, the science fiction horror elements and the Lovecraftian elements, certainly in Alien, appealed to me. So all of those things really kind of lined up. It was like, fuck, I want to do science fiction horror. I want to weird you out about how weird and massive our universe is, because that's fascinating, So second question, what's your approach to lighting and the overall look of your films as a director?
A bit of a trick question there, because I feel for me it's going to vary with each story I'm telling, depending on the needs, of course. But in terms of like my personal preferences, again, this is kind of rooted in it's a lot of depth here, of like rooted in my philosophy, I suppose, as a storyteller. And for me, what matters most as a storyteller is that everything's very character driven for me, and very, very personal and intimate, and even if it's an epic story, like it's very rooted in the intimate personal experiences and relationships between characters, and so especially so there's that, and then also once you're introducing fantastical elements, it's important to me that you're still grounded in a way, that you're able to immerse yourself in that fantasy. And the more grounded you are, the further, I can take you as a storyteller. Right. And so, when it comes to horror in particular, like I really love films like The Babadook or The Conjuring, like the way those kinds of
I love The Babadook.
Yeah.
And The Conjuring's looks like all of the scares in The Conjuring are so good.
I've literally studied that. Like I've made like diagrams and notes on scenes in that film because I've taken so much from that. But then also like Ari Aster, how he does his films. There's a lot of like almost like it looks like a drama, like I love horror films where it's like it's kind of rooted in drama, but then you introduce this, the supernatural element, and because of that, it's so much more impactful. It's so much more shocking. But still, I think there's this balance too that I toe between, where it's like, yes, I want it to be grounded and real, but I also want it to be beautiful. So there are some filmmakers out there that make it so real looking that to me it's just ugly. And I'm like, I don't even want to look at these shots in your film because you're trying to make it so realistic. If I want to look at real life, I just walk around in real life, like, because it's still art. Right. It's still art. And I think that when you're making art, you are being selective. You're making very intentional choices about what you're putting on the screen, or what sounds are in there, depending on what form of art you're creating, and what you include and don't include is saying something. It's saying something about your values, about how you see humanity or the world, or place in it. All these things are being expressed by what you choose and what beauty you include and don't include. And so to me, it's important that it's also beautiful, but so it's like this fine line. So it's never going to be the way I film. It's not going to be exactly realistic. There might be some things about the lighting or the shade or the shadows or the color grading that's a little bit elevated, right? But not too much. So that's kind of my approach.
So I agree with that. I wish more, especially in the corporate world, especially talking about like Disney Marvel films and whatnot, cinematography has gotten kind of corporatized and lazy. It's either super poppy, or looks a little bit pop art or what have you, or it's kind of a mess. It depends on the project, obviously. I think, I don't know. There are certain filmmakers that produce very boring looking films that are just critically acclaimed. Like I can't stand Interstellar. I can't finish Interstellar. I've had a personal beef. Like, I used to love Christopher Nolan. Like, I will say that in 2005, when Batman Begins came out, it changed my life. It blew my little nerd brain, but I can't say that I've watched it anytime within the last couple of decades. But those films, like, You could say that Batman Begins has more of an artistic palette to it, but like everything else looks very corporate, And so when the Batman came out, a lot of people were within like understandably talking about the cinematography behind that. Because
my favorite cinematographer was on there, Greg Fraser.
He's on. Oof.
I love Greg Fraser.
Yeah, he's, I believe he also did Blade Runner 2049, one of my favorite films.
I think so, but I know he did the Dune films.
Yes, he did. Yeah, so 2049 and Dune, and then there are some others in there, but Blade Runner 2049 is better than the original, I feel. Like, it's such a beautiful film from start to finish, and it's very much a visual story. If you're on your phone not paying attention, you're going to miss everything, because the story's not really so much about the dialogue. It is very much a visual story. But yeah, I agree with that. I think that's very smart. Let it fit the project and what you're trying to say with your film.
Like, I say that's my balance, but to the degree to which I will lean into that elevation of reality versus reality, it's going to depend on the story, right?
Yeah, it should. Absolutely. Yeah. So did your experience as an indie author have something to do with your decision to break into filmmaking?
That's funny. I think a lot of people, they see that because it's like my outward trajectory, like publicly has been like, oh, I'm an author. Oh, I'm a filmmaker. And people are like, oh, is this a change? No. So basically, I've known since I was a kid, basically, that I wanted to be, since I was 11, that I wanted to be both a filmmaker and an author. But being an author is less scary. It's something where it's a much more established pathway, especially if you're an indie author. Like, you can, if you decide to be a published author, you can be a published author. It doesn't mean you're going to make money off of it if you're not being strategic, but you can be an author. And being a filmmaker, that one was one that I was like, that there was a good chunk of my 20s where I just left that as a dream in the back of my head because I was too scared to turn it into a goal that I could fail at because it was something I wanted so deeply. But I got over that fear, long story short. And so these are both things that I've wanted for a long time. And so my long-term goal is to be like, just doing all of these things, is, directing films, and then publishing books. And I'd like to be a hybrid author too. That'd be cool. But yeah. So there's not necessarily a connection between those things. It's more just that I started with publishing because I was afraid. Like that's literally it. I was like too afraid to pursue the film stuff seriously for a while.
Yeah, and I'd say like that's a common thread with indie authors. Some just get frustrated trying to query for traditional publishing, and now, like, I am a hybrid author, so I have a publisher, but some of my books haven't been re-released under, Crossroad Macabre Inc. just yet. But we're getting there whenever I have fucking time to do it. All right, so fourth question. What are some of your influences? Do you think you'll continue to work in the horror genre, or once you're more established, do you think you'll branch out a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, my ultimate interest is the same as my, as what I'm interested in as an author. Like, I want to make action adventure films. I want to make, epics, essentially. Very inspired by like the Lord of the Rings films. Christopher Nolan is also I'm kind of a complicated relationship with him. A complicated relationship with like, it's like James Cameron or whatever. My main hero would be in like that space is oh my god, his name is escaping me. He's my favorite director, Denis Villeneuve, and he does the stuff I was describing, where it's very character driven and intimate, even when it's big and epic, and yeah, so that is ultimately the kind of films that I want to make, one day. So that second, I mentioned I have like the three things for my portfolio. I'm working on the other thing in my portfolio is an epic script. But of course, nobody, usually, unless you're like a nepo baby, you're not, or you have the right friends, you're not going to like just step into Hollywood making things like that. So you have to start off generally doing like indie dramas or doing horror, something like that. That's usually where people start. And that I happen to also love horror. So horror isn't my first love. It's like my second, my second love, I guess, in terms of genre. But I still love it, and so it's kind of like I'm entering in through that. But I would like to work one day to doing big action adventure stories. That's my biggest passion.
It's kind of funny. When I was doing OEI a little more frequently, I had less client work, basically. I ended up remotely directing a short scene that was turned into an analog horror film. Or not film, but video for the channel. And I really enjoyed that experience. Just like, even though I was, I was remotely directing a scene in California from Virginia.
That's weird.
So it's weird, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So like, I definitely, like, I could see myself doing a little bit of that in the future, but like, yeah, who knows where things will go. Right now, it probably wouldn't work given my schedule, but in the future, you never know. Okay, so question number 5. Where would you like to see the horror genre go? What type of stories are you yearning for?
Oh, I love that question so much. It's interesting. Before I answer that, I want to make like kind of a general statement about where I think horror is right now. And I believe we're in like a horror golden age. And I think we're also kind of in transition where we're redefining a little bit what horror is. Because, and even some of the films we've mentioned today, you mentioned, I saw the TV Glow. People have argued whether or not that is horror. Because generally, horror, traditionally, it has like a set story structure, and especially like horror films. And there have been a lot of movies that have been coming out lately that don't fit that structure, but they have the same but they still have horror tropes and horror, like a horror-like tone. And so there's this term that's been used called horror adjacent, basically. An interesting example of that would be the X trilogy. So it starts with X, and then it's Pearl, and then Maxine. And that trilogy is so interesting because X is a very like, it follows all of the the structural beats of horror. It's a slasher film, even though it is very intelligent and very creative, and it's got a lot of depth to it and symbolism. And then you have Pearl, which is like the backstory, the origin story of the villain in X. And that one is like, is this a horror movie? I don't know. It's an interesting dark character study, basically, that leads up to horror events. But is it a horror movie? I don't know. And then Maxine is like, this isn't a horror movie. It's like a thriller, but it's the same characters, and it still has the same tone. And so, I give that as an example. There's a lot of films that have been coming out that are in that category where it's like we're starting to expand what horror means and what horror can do, and I think that's really exciting,
Right.
because it's especially for storytellers, it's broadening the horizon of what we can do, and what we've always been able to do whatever we want, but what's acceptable to do, I suppose, and what people have the appetite for.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about being able to, expand horror. I want to see horror get more recognition as an art form. It's starting to a little bit, having the substance get, Oscar attention was really good, but that hasn't happened very many times over the course of Hollywood. It's been very rare that horror films get that kind of attention. And so I would like to see that. I would like to see people starting to recognize that horror is, or can be at least. And sometimes it's campy and silly, and that's fine too, but horror can also be really, really, really deep and really artistic. And so, yeah, I think I just want to see more of that. And more, this might sound cliche and lefty of me, but like, I also really want to see more horror that is as a social commentary coming from marginalized voices that we haven't seen as many of, and seeing more speaking to the horror that already exists in our world. That's what I came into. That's why my, why The Sacrament is the film that I want to make first, because that's me doing that. It's like, hey, here's this thing that's already horror in our society, and it might be hard to wrap your mind around it if you haven't experienced it personally. So I'm going to put you through this horror situation, so you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, and start to expand your perspective and be like, oh wow, this is a horrifying thing in our society. So yeah, I want to see a lot more of that.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. 100% agree with that. That is, interesting talking about I Saw the TV Glow and whether or not it is qualified as horror. Even though my wife did not like that film, the ending sequence made it difficult for her to breathe because she was empathizing so much with the ability to breathe, or the lack thereof, that it affected her on a physical level.
Wow.
So the liminal spaces in that film, I think for the people because it is inherently a trans narrative, the people that have those fears that it is targeting, it's been a huge cultural moment for them. And that totally makes sense. I picked up that it was a trans narrative, but not to the extent that my trans friends would be like, oh no, here's what it's about. This is I'm about to tell you some shit. And I was like, wow, I didn't pick that up at all. So I and not only that, but I'll reference back to Lovecraft Country. Lovecraft Country, I was a little skeptical about because, I like cosmic horror, but I wasn't sure if it was going to fit my definition of cosmic horror. But, following Atticus through 1950s white America is terrifying. You are so worried for Atticus, And, I think that's really powerful. To have representation is not just a tool to make, people of color feel like they can relate to those characters on screen, but it's also, it's important for developing empathy for characters that don't look like you.
And understanding experiences you haven't had.
Right, exactly. So you're talking about making a film called The Sacrament. I grew up in a young earth creationist household. I probably understand where that comes from, where that fear comes from. Trust me.
Probably like this film. When it's made. When.
When, not if. Exactly. So yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I do. Especially, like, we have so many talented neurodivergent people out there, and our government is openly shitting on those people as if they are, fucking dangers to society, like pretty much anything. If you identify as anything other than straight white male right now, you are a target. And that kind of sucks, but we're going to have so much art come out of this so long as it doesn't get burned. But,
they're going to have to fight hard to burn my art. Let's just put it that way. I really do feel like that gives me a lot of strength. I find it, like, purpose, I guess, to put it plainly. Because, yeah, as we were kind of talking off the air, like, it's been pretty discouraging. Everything I say right now feels like an understatement how I actually feel about this. But yeah, just what's going on. It's horrifying. It's a horrifying time to be in America, and it can be difficult to be creative. Like, it's been really difficult for me to focus in the past few months, more so than it normally is. Normally I'm a very focused, productive person, and I've been struggling. But that's one thing that keeps me going, is like the feeling that, hey, the stories that I was already planning, it's not like my plans for what kind of stories I was going to tell changed. I was already wanting to tell these kinds of stories, but now I feel that much more motivated to tell them, because I feel like, this is a cry out that needs to be made. And it's a way of fighting back, I suppose. And yeah, it's just like, what else can I do? Like, I'm not going to let anyone take my voice away. So
exactly. Like, no, we're not about that. Final question. Where can our viewers and listeners find your work?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to keep up with me is going to be to follow my newsletter, which I have on my website, briannadasilva.blog, and then you go to the subscribe, basically. But you can also find me on YouTube. I don't have a lot on there, but like from a filmmaking perspective, that's where I'm going to be posting things. I have, some of my short films that I've already made are on there, and also very soon there will be more content related to the short film that I'm working on right now. So that's probably the best places. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me as curious_storyteller.
All right, cool. And those links will be in the description and pinned comment for this episode. Anyway, thank you, Brianna, for coming on the podcast. Such short notice, too. It's been a pleasure. This has been a fantastic discussion, and you have an open invitation to come back anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was definitely a fun conversation.
All right. So big thanks to Brianna da Silva for being our guest on today's podcast episode. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment your favorite thing about liminal spaces or modern horror films, your favorite horror film, whatever it is. Put that down in the comments, subscribe, ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who enjoys storytelling, diatribes, video essays, and podcasts. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.